Hello, everyone, and welcome to the February 12th meeting of the New York State Independent Redistricting Commission. Thank you for coming for our special meeting that we scheduled outside of what we scheduled previously. In terms of updates, could we go to Karen and Doug for an update on the timeline of the census data?
Yes, the Census Bureau has indicated that they will not be releasing the data used for redistricting until late September.
Can you just speak up? Sorry.
Oh, the Census Bureau has indicated that they won't be releasing the data used for redistricting until late September.
And we've determined that's the PL data, right, Karen? Or
Correct. PL, yeah, 94-171.
Okay. I mean, commissioners, I think, it would be helpful if Karen and Doug could talk to the Census Bureau and get additional information that, is more detailed than what's in the New York Times. So, I think I would ask that the two, unless there's any objection, I would ask that the two of them, talk to the Census Bureau. I think it would be good in any case for them to establish a line of communication with them. Would there be any objections to that?
No.
By the way, there's a gentleman named James Whitehorn. I don't know if he's mentioned in the
Yes.
Times article, but he heads the redistricting office for the Census Bureau. He would probably be the best person to.
Sure, with your authorization, I can reach out to James.
And if you could try to find out when the House apportionment numbers are coming in, that would be excellent. Okay. Anything else on this topic, commissioners? Commissioner Martin?
I would also ask if there is a candid conversation with the Census Bureau, just getting a sense of what is it they're going to be doing between now and September. Are they continuing to collect data? Are they reviewing the data they've already assembled? I mean, adjourning from date to date without having an explanation as to what exactly they need to have this additional time to do is odd. What are they doing during the next 5, 6, 7 months that requires the adjournment? If we can get some sort of clarity on that, I'd be interested in knowing that.
I would add one other item. American Community Survey 2019 5-year data set has been released. Maybe a conversation with Mr. Whitehorn about what he thinks, in his professional opinion, what appropriate data that we might at least preliminarily begin looking at, scoping out as we're waiting perhaps another 6 months before the official PL 9471 file is released.
Can we request?
Did I make any sense?
Yeah,
Karen?
yes, but the ACS data can't be used as a proxy for the PL data.
Understood. But it's something, it's the most recent data set release. It does go down to block, I believe, and census tract level. It's only 1 year out from the official data set that we may not be able to get our hands on for, it sounds like, perhaps another 6 months.
Right.
We don't want to just be sitting around here twiddling our thumbs.
Who would we have to talk to about the availability of the ACS data for New York?
It's
data
available.
set. I know. Okay,
Yeah,
is there a single office? I'm used to going through our regional planning office for our regional data. This is not regional data, it's the statewide data. Is there a statewide, I don't know who does this.
Well, yeah, there's a state demographer, Laura Close, C-L-O-S-E. She's the official New York State demographer. I'm sure they may have already crunched it. And there's another data center based at Cornell University.
Yes.
Pre-packages a lot of that data just for New York, our 62 counties, et cetera. So I'm saying those are some other, avenues we can pursue, I think, while you're finding out when is the National Census Bureau going to release the official data we're required to work with?
Okay,
And
sure.
looking ahead to
I can
public
forward those
engagement.
contacts.
Sorry.
Please.
I can
yeah,
forward those contacts as well.
Great. And
Yeah.
Doug and I can reach out. Yeah.
And looking ahead to public engagement, I think that this would be a good, at least a source of information that we can use, right? I mean, if we in fact decide to go forward with hearings prior to the PL data coming in, then this is at least some data that the public can look to and that we can look to. But that's a ways down the road. Anything else that commissioners would like to discuss on this issue?
Well, as you segue, I mean, I'll be the stater of the obvious that this, regardless of that delay, it compresses our work, even to a ridiculously great extent. And regardless of whether they have the census data, the other issues today are very important to get settled so that things can begin to work even without that data, like setting criteria, keeping groups together, not separating in New York City, not separating boroughs that have been together, all the kind of things that we have to do, with that data, but that we can get started doing. We really need to get started. So what you're going to segue into, if that helps, really has to be settled, because even without the data from the federal government, arguably every day that we're not working or every day that the lines stay the same is a U.S. constitutional violation. Never mind a New York State constitutional violation, and we don't want to be in that state. So I'm going to hand it off to you guys and see if I can contribute anything here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Brady. I think that's absolutely right, and it's I think the way it stands, we're going to get the data after the statutory deadline for getting maps out to the public. Like there is, so we will not be in compliance with that timeline, unfortunately. So, but as you said, Commissioner Brady, segueing to the next topic that goes into this, the contract that we have received with SUNY-RF. I know that everyone here is in receipt of it. I have my copy here. There were a number of issues that I was concerned about in looking at the contract, just laying them out on the table. I was concerned that it appeared that there was no approval from the Attorney General. Indemnification hadn't been handled. It also, the concerns about, holding back money and, allocating 10% as well off the top to SUNY-RF. And then I was also concerned that there were issues where Karen and Doug had talked to SUNY-RF, but those issues had not been put in writing in the contract. But I defer to the Commission. What are your thoughts on this contract, as well as your thoughts on how to proceed?
Well, just as a basic issue, and Commissioner Mamora, I agree with your concerns, but on a basic level, reading the statute and constitutional amendment that created this commission, we're responsible for hiring our executive directors. Our executive directors are tasked with putting together staff and putting together a budget and proposing a budget. This contract speaks entirely to a different set of standards, a different construct with regard to staffing, a different construct with regard to budgeting. Lines of authority are certainly not what's in the Constitution. So before we get into the particulars of the contract itself, what I would urge everyone is to consider the construct itself. The fact that this contract is, in my view, unconstitutional, that it does not include our commission, was not negotiated with us, is contrary to the, frankly, the effect of the state legislature and governor having allocated $1 million for this commission. The fact that they're controlling those funds, the fact that they've created a construct between the Research Foundation, the Rockefeller Institute, and the Department of State. Now, the Rockefeller Institute is thrown in there so that they can claim academic credentials in reviewing academic data. But let's understand what this is. This is nonsense. It doesn't work. The Rockefeller Institute is not a party to this contract. They're not doing the research. We are. Our staff is going to be doing in compiling this information. not theirs, but the contract speaks to their staff, that is our staff conducting this research. So I reject the construct that the state, in this case, the governor, has placed in our hands. This isn't a solution. This isn't something we should be happy about. This is, frankly, a violation of the very terms of this commission's independence. I can point to the fact that the governor is, the appointing body for all of the directors of the Research Foundation, as well as obviously the person who appoints the Secretary of State. There are all kinds of issues with regard to this construct, which before we get into the particulars and give it credibility and discuss the individual lines in this contract, we should come to a decision, I think, that we reject it outright, because I reject, and I would urge all of you to do the same, the construct that's been put before us. It doesn't work. And I'm certainly not going to delegate the authority that we have to put this data together and to propose these maps and these lines to somebody else.
I generally agree with you, Commissioner. I think we're in such a position where we'll have to, however we get this done properly, it'll have to come through some kind of executive agency. So I'm not sure that our independence would be called into question, because I'm not sure how else we can get the money. But I agree with everything else. The construct is entirely not for us. And one point that I'd like to make is that I think the SUNY RF is not considered a state agency. They don't have open meetings requirements. It's not clear to us under the contract whether our deliberations and our work product would have to be confidential, because SUNY RF requires it to be confidential, which is clearly at odds with what we really have to do. So I would just add that one point, but I agree with you otherwise.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Commissioner. I think it's clear based on the contract is their stock contract that they use, and that this is very much a square peg in a round hole, the contract language. So, I definitely agree with you, Commissioner.
I do think there's some fundamental, if we're not going to discuss the provisions of the contract, there are some fundamental principles that are just completely ignored. And you alluded to them, David, earlier when you talked about indemnification. I mean, under the public officers law, there's no indemnification of independent contractors. The Research Foundation is specifically a independent contractor under the contract. I don't know, as us as subcontractors thereof, whether or not we're also independent contractors under that. I mean, it just, there's so many things that are wrong with this contract that it just doesn't work. And the fundamental, as Jack pointed out, the fundamental misrepresentation of independence is just terrible. We're not independent at all under this contract, and in fact, they're taking $350,000 off the top or whatever from our money. I mean, it's just there's just nothing good about this thing from the beginning to the end.
Yeah, I'd like to actually state that further, in that the way this contract is constructed, there is no independent authority or rights of the commission at all. What is purported to be proposed under this contract is that the $1 million appropriation has been taken by the Department of State, put into SUNY Research Foundation pursuant to this contract, and then notwithstanding that appropriation was for the work of the commission doesn't have any entitlement to notice under the contract, nor do we have any authority under it. So it's completely inconsistent with the independence contemplated by the state constitution.
So, Commissioner, I think, sorry, go ahead, Commissioner.
Yeah, I just like to say, I agree with all that's been said here by each commissioner. It's a complete practical matter. It's impossible for us to go forward without clearly stated indemnification. I certainly know that, and I'm sure that we all feel the same, that's an impossibility for us to function without certainty in that area. And then secondly, as a practical matter, and it's been addressed, but by the time you deduct the 10%, the 250,000 for legal fees, and our two commissioners or executive directors' salaries plus their packages, add in some workers' comp insurance or whatever else we're going to be expected to come up with to protect, liability for ourselves and others. There is no money left. So I just don't. I think construct is an impossibility in terms of allowing us to function as we are envisioned in the Constitution.
At this point, if I may, ladies and gentlemen, given the state of this contract, the expenses, the other arguably I'm not going to try to say the word obfuscation of the thank you of our purpose and of the Constitution, it seems like at some point this has to land up in front of a federal judge by one of the groups or anybody has standing. This has to land in front of a federal court, which within weeks, because they're required to take up cases like this, I believe election law cases and other law cases, immediately could be resolved. If the pace that we're going at, and not because of what we're doing, but because of what's being thrown in front of us continues, it's obvious that we're being stymied and not meant to do our jobs and not meant to be independent. And that might need intervention. So, I mean, I guess at the sound of my voice, or if there's anyone else who wants to take up a legal action to get what needs to be done here done, they want to do that with all due dispatch.
What is the end date on this proposed contract?
April 2022. Sorry, March 31, 2022.
So end of the next fiscal year.
It's a 1-year contract.
It's a 2-year contract. Right. 2-year contract.
That's what I wanted to get clarity on.
So I think in terms of next steps, and I think there appears to be consensus that this structure is not workable. I think the next question is how can we fix it, right? And my understanding is that with the appropriations in April, we may be able to have a different setup that might be workable. But in the interim, before that is done, I'm wondering if we should look into whether we are able to spend money now under SUNY RF and then switch our money and switch everything to a different umbrella when the time comes in April. And I don't know the answer to that.
Well, the problem we have right off the bat, David, right off the bat, David, is the issue of indemnification. If we're going to be spending money that we don't have any authority, without that type of indemnification, I don't know how you do it.
You're right, Commissioner. Yeah.
I think we need some clarification as to whether we are indemnified. Maybe we need to request the Attorney General to give us an opinion as to whether or not we're indemnified and under what circumstances. And if we were involved with the SUNY Foundation, are we indemnified under those circumstances? Because we can't. From a practical standpoint, what Commissioner Nesbitt pointed out on buying insurance and doing all these things, and I don't know, knowing full well that we're going to get sued at some point, how would you buy who's going to insure us? I mean, Gene, you want your malpractice policy from your firm on the table, or David, or you guys all have umbrella policies out there that are going to cover you? I mean, I don't know that I really want to find that out.
Yeah, I have a question for our executive directors. Have any of the state entities involved taken a position under this construct that they've pieced together, whether or not we are indemnified by the state? Have any of the lawyers, state entities, councils, or anyone taken a formal position or informal position on that topic?
I can answer that, Karen, if you'd.
Go ahead.
When we were on conversations with Department of State and SUNY RF, Department of State said there will be no indemnification. So the commissioners would not be indemnified.
Give a reason for that conclusion?
We asked and they did not respond. In fact, this was talking about the contract and we would not give them a budget, as Karen and I were required as executive directors for that contract. We refused to give it to them until those legal questions were answered, and then the contract was done without our knowledge. So that budget that is in that contract is not the budget that Karen and I submitted.
I would just say, I think we should ask the Attorney General for an opinion, not only on with regard to this contract, but are we indemnified based on the construct of our of the commission in the Constitution? Are we? Does that give us the privilege of indemnification? That would be the to give us the broadest, best answer. And then if yes, we're good. If not, then under what circumstances do we have to create that situation?
I agree with Commissioner Nesbitt and Commissioner Winter. I think that this, we need to get an opinion. And while we're also doing that, you notice that there is a, the contract says that it requires AG authorization, but there it doesn't appear to be any authorization on the contract. So I would ask that our co-executive directors ask whether this was actually reviewed by the Attorney General's office.
Is there some reason why we can't be contract directly with the Department of State ourselves rather than having to go through the Research Foundation? I mean,
one of the reasons is that we're not a 501c3, and the Department of State in their aid to localities budgets allocates money to 501c3s like member items. And that may be the excuse, but it needs to be written down as the rationalization.
Well, I mean, I agree. That's an excuse. I mean, I just don't, I mean, is there a legal impediment for them to enter into a direct contract with us to allow us to operate as the Constitution indicated independently, notwithstanding whether or not their prior practices of only contracting with, I don't know if their prior practices of only dealing with 501c3s are statutory or whether or not they're policies, but I just don't understand. We just can't be run by a third party under which we don't even have a contract. I mean, we don't have a contract with anybody. We don't have a contract. They have contracts. They're having contracts with each other and leaving us out of it.
I think one of the issues on this point is that for some reason the legislature decided to fund the commission with a grant, and as opposed to a direct appropriation, and that then limits the ability. So the point is very simple: money's fungible. Recast the money in a different way, fund some other state entity with a different type of funding stream, and make that money available to the commission directly as it was intended to be. Commissioner Benger, you and I were both wrong. The agreement is 3 years. The contract is 3 years. Even though it was signed January 27th, 2021, not more than 2 or so weeks ago, it does date back to 2019. So
I thought I remembered that date, but I couldn't believe that that's really what
they backdated it back to 2019. Look, and Commissioner Memora, to your point, I just think that
the end date, Commissioner Martins.
I'm sorry.
What is your identification of the end date for that expiration?
It's March 31st, 2022. They actually dated it April 1st, or the term is April 1st, 2019 to March 31st, 2022. As I said, it was signed January 27, 21. And just to the last point, Commissioner Imamura, my concern of accessing any of the funds that may be made available to this commission pursuant to this contract would somehow be construed that it is actually validating the contract, and anybody, I can't do that. I certainly wouldn't. I wouldn't give somebody else authority over our staffing and directing our staff. And I don't think any of us should. The contract is a nullity. It's a non-starter. It doesn't affect us. It shouldn't affect us. It doesn't involve us, didn't involve us. And we shouldn't even contemplate it as a contract that affects us one way or the other. We should look at it for what it is, a contract between the Research Foundation and the Department of State for some project that they may want to work on, but certainly not one that involves this independent redistricting commission. And until the legislature, and I've said this before, and I think we all should take it to heart, the legislature and the governor, if they wanted to, could make the monies available to us in a way that allows us to access it and move forward with our job. They haven't done it. And this contract is unfortunate.
And I agree with you, Commissioner. I think what's been suggested to us is that if we wait to this coming budget, that the legislature will come up with some other way to get us the money, hopefully. I mean, I agree with you. I don't understand why they couldn't simply say this money's, is appropriate to the Department of State for the commission, period, and let them contract directly with us.
Yes, and that the commissioners are public officers, and that all of these other things that flow from it. This is not the first commission that the state has had. And having been a former member of the legislature, as there are others on this commission, this can happen today. It could happen tomorrow. There's no reason for them to wait for a budget to actually do it. As we saw, they did advance a constitutional amendment to change the redistricting process going forward, and they had time to actually put that on the agenda and vote for it. If they wanted us to have the ability to access the funds and to do our job that we're constitutionally mandated to do, they would have done it. And so, I think we're all disappointed, but we really should not accept this document and this construct because of all of the, we're not going to reiterate it here, but all of the things we've already spoken to. Yes, the control of our own staff, the independence, all of the things that the constitutional amendment requires. And frankly, for the commission, recognition as public officers and indemnification, which comes with being a member of a commission. And I've stressed it before. New York is unique in the entire country right now in this process, that we are stymied by our own elected officials, state officials, in being able to do our job. I don't know any other state in this country. All 50 states simultaneously are going through this process. Everyone's going through redistricting. Everyone is trying to get the census data, and they're moving forward, except for us. And that's something we should all be speaking to. It's a disgrace. It's an embarrassment, and it stands directly at the foot of the governor, and frankly, to the legislative leaders themselves that haven't pressured the governor by putting a bill in front of them that actually allows us to move forward.
Commissioner Wofford, okay, never mind. Were you going to speak, Commissioner?
Yeah, I was. I just was pressing the wrong
Okay.
spot on my screen.
As long as you don't turn into a cat, Commissioner. Right?
Go upside down.
Yeah, look, just a note, Commissioner Martins is right that this construct in this contract is completely inconsistent with the commission's independence. I would just call everyone's attention to attachment C to the contract, which, while it acknowledges the existence legally of the independent commission, which it must, because we do exist under the state constitution and the state law, and nonetheless purports to define what our commission is and is not responsible for. With all due respect, the Department of State and the SUNY Research Foundation don't have authority to define at all what we are or are not responsible for, or what things that they are going to say, notwithstanding that they are purporting to take all of our appropriation that they do not have to do on our behalf. Further, they're trying to put the legal contractual obligations and authorities of our commission on a piece of paper, having refused to negotiate or discuss it with us or our executive directors at all, as we know from our prior proceedings in our prior meetings. So this entire construct really legally, in my view, not that this is an opinion, is an akin to the state deciding that some third-party foundation can have an appropriation that was designated for us as a constitutionally created entity and delegate authority to that third party without any input or legal authorization from this commission. And so I think, in fact, in terms of the constitutionality of it, it should be viewed as a contract as a nullity. Simply illegal, frankly.
Commissioner Flato, you were going to say something, sorry.
Yeah, a question, and I would imagine, Karen, maybe you could answer this. Is LAT 4 funded as a freestanding entity? In other words, its funding is not traveling through any other agency in terms of its budget and its appropriation?
I can't answer that.
I believe
can.
that that force is a part of the legislative budget.
Yeah, it's a legislative task force.
Okay.
Legislative task force. And I dare say I have a question for all the lawyers in the group. If you were negotiating a contract and you received correspondence from someone who asked how much money was going to be apportioned in this contract that's under negotiation for a service that they uniquely are positioned to offer, would that constitute the beginnings of a conflict of interest? You're trying to negotiate a contract and someone out of the blue writes you and says, how much money are you setting aside in this contract that you're planning to negotiate for this particular activity that I am licensed to do and uniquely skilled to do? Some people would argue in the not-for-profit land that I used to occupy, that's a conflict of interest. That's a weird letter that somebody sets aside. When you think about the sources of the inquiries that have been received about A, our appropriation, B, our function, and then particularly now, listening to how this conversation has evolved to the Research Foundation, which I'm actually regretting that I mentioned a few months ago, and the Rockefeller Institute, this is starting to look an awful lot like something else. And I need to say that. I've been quiet, unusual for me, all afternoon, but I have to tell you, we have correspondence from folks who have asked us, how much money are you setting aside for this particular activity? That in a universe that I otherwise would occupy would say that's a conflict of interest and go away. Surely you can't be serious about asking us that at this point, but they were. And
So Commissioner,
that troubles me.
yeah, Commissioner Frazier, certainly
Yes,
since none of us seem to have the comfort of indemnification, and even if we did, we as commissioners would not be rendering legal opinions, whether on your question or any other question. I think the more fundamental issue is if the government wants to say to the Research Foundation or Princeton or whatever charity it wants, hey, we're going to hand you the money to go do what the Independent Redistricting Commission is supposed to do. That's just simply not consistent with what the law says, in my view. I mean, there's a commission that's been set up under state law. We've taken the oath as commissioners. And if somebody wants to sign a contract saying they're going to give that to someone else, that's very nice that they say that, but it's really none of our affair.
Okay. I agree. The idea that the Research Foundation, and I guess it should be mentioned, I think it was mentioned a little earlier, that I'm not even sure that their charter would allow them to serve as a contractor for our purposes. If you look at their charter, it's all based on academic research. They're not doing the research. It's not their staff doing the research. I'm not sure that this serves and this purpose can be interpreted as being academic or even appropriate under their charter. It is not lost on me, and shouldn't certainly be lost on anyone, that this is the same construct that the governor used for his Buffalo Billions program and for other efforts at economic redevelopment that didn't necessarily pan out so well. People were indicted. There were federal investigations, all through the Research Foundation, using the Research Foundation as the tool for those efforts. Listen, as Commissioner Imamura said earlier, I have no interest in being a round peg in a square hole or a square peg in a round hole. It doesn't fit. It shouldn't fit. It doesn't make sense. Let them fix it, come back to us, and then we can move forward.
So, commissioners, in terms of next steps, I mean, I think, we are in, sorry, Commissioner Winter. Yes, you unmuted
Yeah,
yourself.
if we can move forward, I think that what we need to hear is a vote to say that we reject this contract, and then secondarily, I think we need a vote to request the Attorney General for an opinion with regard to our overall indemnification, notwithstanding what entity we're associated with or funded or what contracting with. We just need to have those clarifications, I think, certainly before we go forward in one way or another.
Yeah,
I have one
Commissioner
small
Walker,
modification.
yes.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
One small
Commissioner.
modification, that to the extent we are asking for an opinion from the Attorney General, I dare say that should be an opinion in writing.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, I agree with the second, Commissioner. In terms of the first, I'm not sure if, I'm not sure if it's necessary for us to reject the contract, given that we are not a party to it, right? So, is it necessary to do a rejection? I mean, I think that we're looking at recasting everything through a budget appropriation in April regardless, right?
Well, what if they're going forward with this contract with the expectations that that's what we're going to be doing? Don't we have to push back with some official response from this from the commission that this is not something that we're in agreement with? I mean, we got to have some response. Otherwise, we got a contract that's going forward.
Commissioner Flateau. Yeah.
I was just thinking perhaps another way to frame it is the IRC shall not participate in this contractual arrangement that has been proposed.
Well,
That's different. That's slightly different from saying we can't reject the contract that we're not a party to. Might be the counter argument. But I think what we're saying is, for this body, the IRC, we are not going to be a participant in that contractual arrangement that has been proposed. And we can delineate our reasons why.
well, I don't. Okay, it's the same. We're talking the same thing.
Yeah, I agree with that framing of it. I think it's legal.
We're not rejecting the contract per se. What we're saying, I think, is that to the extent that the contract purports to affect us or to affect our responsibilities as commissioners under this independent redistricting commission, that we reject that contract and that premise. It's essentially the same thing that George just suggested.
Right, but isn't the logical outgrowth of that they can't spend any money under the contract then in order to be 100% clear?
Yeah, I think we need to make the statement. I think we shouldn't leave it up for grabs. David, if the legislature is going to actually do something, do it. This shouldn't stop them from doing it, but what it does stop definitively are people running around saying that they have funded the Independent Redistricting Commission and they've already started that narrative, and we should take the necessary step publicly and formally to reject the narrative. We have not been funded. This is not a proper funding stream. This contract isn't appropriate. It's unconstitutional. It's illegal, and we should be clear about it.
Right. Yeah, Jack, Commissioner Martins, I just want to make sure everybody's clear on the phone that notwithstanding that we are not parties to the contract, I don't want anyone under the color of our name spending one thin dime on our behalf under a contract that we disagree with, whether we call that a rejection or otherwise.
I think that's a very important point, because all this contract really has done is given $100,000 to an unaffiliated agency and allowed them to encumber more of the absolute minimum amount of money that we need to get started. And that's not acceptable as well.
So the motion on the table is that we are putting out a statement saying that we are not participating in the contract between the Department of State and SUNY RF. Is that what we are saying?
And that we don't believe that any funds should be expended from that
Yes.
contract in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, so that's the motion on the table. Do I have a second? Is anyone?
Second.
Yes. Okay, we have a second. Okay.
Motion.
Yeah, but anyone else have anything else they want to say on this issue? Okay. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right.
Aye.
Gene, do you vote? Oh, we've lost Commissioner Banger. All right, so then the second issue on the table is the Attorney General, reaching out to the Attorney General for an opinion. I mean, I think this is to a certain extent unnecessary, but I think it would be useful to reach out to the Attorney General on this question regardless. Does anyone wish to discuss this?
The question of commissioner indemnification, what exactly are we seeking from the agency?
So what exactly, we're asking the Attorney General two things. I'm sorry, go ahead. Someone said something. Okay.
Yeah, a couple of things.
Yeah,
First of
Commissioner.
all, our understanding is that this contract purportedly required the approval of the Attorney General. The first question is, did the Attorney General actually approve it? Or by contrast, did the Attorney General refuse to approve it? That's a threshold issue we need to clarify, because this may be, if in fact approval from the Attorney General is required and it wasn't received, then this whole conversation may be less relevant. And then I think you move on from there to the question of indemnification.
Okay,
Is
so
the Attorney General's approval only required as to form? They're not. The Attorney General is not opining with regard to the provisions of the contract. Are they? I mean, I didn't think so. But
I mean, it appears to be kind of a rubber stamp, but I do think that their approval is required for it to have legal effect. At least that's what I read.
There is a constitutionality issue that some of the commissioners have raised with respect to the contract. Is it in violation of the state constitutional provisions with respect to the IRC? That's I think I've heard that issue being raised in this.
Well, what we need guidance from is, are there circumstances? First of all, are we indemnified? I agree. I think we are by virtue. We should be.
Yeah, we should be. That's my read of the law. We should be. But,
however, are there circumstances under which we would not be indemnified, i.e., the contract that is being operating under the contract that's being proposed by Department of State and the SUNY Research Foundation? I mean, did that create a circumstance where we're not indemnified? That's really what we're talking about. Is the concerns that we have is that, did you set us up is there a structure under which we then lose our indemnification under the statute? That's kind of what guidance I'm kind of looking for.
Well, I think, George, or commissioners, I think we need to, since this has been brought into question by the Department of State in conversation with our executive director, I think we need an affirmative opinion about our indemnification. I also believe that we should be indemnified just by the construct that creates us under the Constitution. But since it's been brought to question, let's clarify it, because it's in none of our best interests if somehow this has been brought in, made an issue that we, would need to fight out and define in court somehow.
All right. So, sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Brady.
No, and that would also lead towards, I suppose, if I remember correctly, exhausting administrative remedies. We've done everything we could. We're getting comments on a bad contract. What more can you do before this gets settled? So I just want to concur on getting all those issues before the Attorney General and getting something back as quickly as possible.
So the motion, sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Martins.
When we were appointed, we were each asked to sign and accept the appointment as a public officer, which was filed with the Department of State. I did. I'm sure everyone else did as well. And so that to me means something. It should mean something to anyone who has to go through that process. It's not one that is done haphazardly and should be taken lightly. And then there is an effective law of being a public officer, which that document frankly recognizes. And we should, to the extent that there's a question mark, we should seek clarity on that as well.
All right, so the motion on the table is to ask our co-executive directors to contact the Attorney General's office and ask for two things. One, whether the Attorney General had approved the contract, and number two, whether the commissioners and the co-executive directors are indemnified, if the commission proceeds under SUNA ARF. Is that clear? Does anyone have any changes to that? All right, do I have a second?
I second.
I have a second. Okay, I have 2 seconds. All in favor? Aye. All right, motion carries. So commissioners, is there anything else we would like to discuss before scheduling our next meeting?
Any updates on our the 30-day amendment process and our budget requests for the next fiscal year?
We have no, I have no update. I don't believe Karen does either.
Or have we gotten any response from, I think it was directed to the budget director, and the governor and our legislative leaders were copied on that letter.
I did receive a verbal that they did receive our request. I did not receive anything in writing still.
The budget division verbally acknowledged receipt?
They acknowledged the receipt of our request, yes. That was Division of Budget, that's correct.
Okay.
I don't know if Karen has anything else on that.
No, I have nothing to add.
Commissioner Frazier, are you going to say something? Yeah.
No, the only thing I was going to add is that on the list of things that we set out to do is we began a process of planning our public engagement. I think that should continue. That we continue to plan our public engagement, given the pressure that's been created by the Bureau of the Census with the delay, given that we are going to be looking for ACS data, given the fact that while all the other, we're getting, this is not a legal term, messed around with about the contract and the money, there is one public commitment that we made as independent redistricting commissioners, and that was to get involved, to plan public engagement. Evilise did a really great job of a beginning, and I think that we should find a way, even if we create our own little subcommittees, to get to work on it. Because that's what the public is holding us accountable for under the constitutional amendment. And while we're mucking around with the administrative stuff, there's no reason for us to not work on this.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Commissioner Frazier. I mean,
I totally agree as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the most frustrating part of these difficulties is that the cost is not to us, the cost is to the public.
And
right?
if you don't mind my saying so, the moment we get out there, I think the public will be with us. See, this is all interesting and quiet and all behind closed doors stuff. The moment we get out with a plan for public engagement, even if we say we'd like to be able to do this, but we don't have our money yet, it necessarily shifts the discourse. And I think it's about time. We've been good doobies so far. Let's act bad and do what we're supposed to do.
Agreed.
The only comment I would make there, and I've just, until we get the indemnification question behind us, we do, and I hope it's a slight risk, but have the risk of having somebody sue us because we didn't include them in our public engagement plan and they'd sue us personally. So, I mean, that's unlikely, but let's just get this indemnification question answered.
Anything else, commissioners, that we would like to discuss before scheduling our next meeting? So there being none, Eric, we had talked about March 19th as a meeting. Would that work for you guys? And does that work for the full commission?
March 19th.
Yes, Friday, March 19th. Yeah, thanks, Tom. I appreciate it.
Time,
We had been doing in the mornings generally. Would
10 a.m.
10 a.m. Yes, okay. 10 a.m. work for everyone?
Yep.
Yep, works for you, Commissioner Frazier,
Yeah,
Commissioner
fine.
Winter, Commissioner Martins works, Commissioner Bangert works, Commissioner Nesbitt.
It works for me. Is there any concern about going out 5 weeks at this point to our next meeting? We don't have a construct. We don't have funding. The contract doesn't work. I would just, obviously, this commission's been very accommodating when we need to hold meetings, on the spur of a moment. So perhaps if we do get news, Doug and Karen, you can let us know. And otherwise, March 19th as a placeholder certainly makes sense.
I agree, Commissioner Frazier. Certainly, if there's any development. Sorry, Karen.
I just want to remind you that we have a meeting scheduled for next week. So do you want to cancel that?
Yeah, I would say cancel that, commissioners. Is there any objection? And then stick with what Commissioner Martins proposed, where if something comes up, we'll schedule another meeting shortly.
Just quick clarification, that was 10 a.m.?
10 a.m. Yes. Does that work for you, Commissioner Nesbitt? I know you have that Thursday
Yes.
meeting.
When
Okay.
do the budget hearings start? I would assume that they would start sometime earlier in March.
They already started.
They already started. They're almost over. They're over.
The legislative one house budgets would be out in March.
In March. By when?
Prior to this, it looks like it would be prior to the 19th.
I would presume that Doug will let us know whether or not we made the 30-day amendments. Doug
Right,
and Karen,
gonna bring that
the
up.
likelihood of that is probably slim to none. However, if we do make that, then that would be helpful. Secondarily, the legislative one house budget resolution should be out before the 19th of March. Therefore, we'll know whether or not we're moving in that direction. There is some thought, and maybe Doug and Karen can kick it around that. Is it possible for us to be funded under the legislative budget? That certainly would provide for a certain amount of flexibility for us, so or allow us to have our independence. I don't know. That's just a thought for some people to chew on, because we got to get it out of the governor's hands. I think
The executive
would be very
branch.
helpful, and I would think that would be, is a bipartisan type of approach these days. I think would be helpful to get it out of the governor's hands. If we could be funded under the legislature budget, maybe that would give us the type of flexibility that would be more useful in our going forward. But anyway, that's a thought I'm throwing out. Maybe you kick that around. Our executive directors kick that around, whether or not or explore that possibility. But one way or another, by the 19th of March, we're going to know whether we're dead or not. Because if we're not in the one house resolutions, we're not there for money. And we're not going to live on the appropriation that we have.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this topic? All right, so we have scheduled a meeting for March 19th. We have canceled the meeting for next week. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? I have from Commissioner Nesbitt, second by John. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you for joining us on short notice, and we will see you on March 19th. Have a good day, everyone.